All right, friends, it's another daily devotions. It is February 19th, and we are looking today at Numbers chapters 18 through 20. So we left last time with a lot of conflict and rebellion, people rebelling against Moses and Aaron, and God showing the people that he has chosen them and is going to work through them. That's the way God has designed it. And we ended also with a lot of the Israelites saying to Moses that they're perishing, that they're lost, because everybody who approaches the tabernacle will die. If you remember, the Levites wanted all to be equal priests like Aaron and Moses, being able to approach the tabernacle, approach the holiness of God. And God says, no, that's not the way it's going to work. And so we left yesterday with this idea of the people not knowing or not having any confidence anymore in being able to approach God, to be able to be connected to God's holiness, which is everything. If you want to be connected to the people, if you want to be connected to God himself. So what happens then starting in 18 is we get more instructions to the priests and the Levites. Part of this is because we've already seen that the Israelites are wandering in the wilderness for 40 years because of their disobedience. And so because they're in the wilderness longer, inevitably you need more legislation before you enter the promised land. And so because of what has happened, God gives Aaron particularly, this is God speaking to Aaron at this point, delineating the responsibilities of the priests and the Levites. Now, this is where we first really get a distinction made between priests and Levites. The distinction is there, but it isn't always pronounced clearly, right? So you have, the best way to say this is priests are all Levites, but not all Levites are priests, okay? So what happens here is you get a certain group of people, descendants of Aaron and their family and his family and their descendants, who come out of the Levites and are Levites, but they're priests. That means they're the ones that perform the duties in the tabernacle itself, the sacrifices, approaching entering the holy place, approaching the Holy of Holies. So they are the priests who actually make intercession for the people, who stand as the buffer between God and the people. They actually are the ones who do their duties in the tabernacle. The Levites, the rest of the Levites, become known and become practically temple assistants. They are priestly assistants. They assist the priests with the necessary duties and routines in the outer court of the tabernacle, that place that is not the tabernacle but is fenced off. It's the outer court. And so this is essentially now the distinction. And by the way, by the time we get to Jesus, 1,200 years later, that distinction will be clear. You will have the priests, you will have the Levites. So the priests attend to the sacrificial duties in the temple, and the Levites will assist the priests with the other duties that surround the temple. So maybe that's the best way to say it. So this is what we've got going on here at chapter 18. It's again about how to approach the Lord and God in the Lord's holiness, and not be casual about it. And then if you get discussion about the priest's portion, and this goes back again to the tithe. So the Levites do not have a portion of land, and will not have a portion of land on which to survive, on which to grow crops, and which to have herds. So because they're busy with the tabernacle precincts. So what happens is you have the other 11 tribes tithe their produce, their herds, their wealth, if you will, to the Levites so that the Levites can survive. And then the Levites take a tenth of what they receive and they give it to the priests. So the Levites tithe on their tithe to the priests. So that's the way this works. And then you get mention of the firstborn again. If we remember, the firstborn of everything belongs to God. And so, and what happens again is that, so firstborn animals are sacrificed. First produce is offered to the tabernacle, to the priests and the Levites. But the firstborn children are redeemed by a tax, if you will, by payment. There's a payment of that is due to the temple to redeem their firstborn sons and daughters. Now, again, the reason for this is, this may seem strange to us, but in a world of child sacrifice, in a world where peoples around the Israelites knew of child sacrifice, sacrificing the firstborn to the deity. In that world, this is rather radical because God is saying, no, you're not going to kill your children. You're not going to sacrifice your firstborn. What you're going to do instead, because, you know, sometimes when there is loss of something, you need to replace it. So, you know, you have the loss of something that is done in the world you live in that is not good. Sometimes you don't just want to get rid of it. Sometimes you want to replace it so that indeed people can still feel they've done the right thing without having to have do what they used to do, do what they used to do, something like that. So you don't just say you will not do this. What you say is your firstborn children, they belong to me. You can redeem them by a tax, by paying X amount of shekels, and that then that money is then in place of the offering of the firstborn. Pretty radical stuff, actually, in that day. It's very important. I think it's really important that in the midst of some of the things that we continue to see and will see that may be a little disturbing in our day and age, that here way back when God was saying to the people of Israel, you will not kill your children. You will not offer up their lives in death to me. So very important. Okay, so we get that. We also are having chapter 19, the ceremony of the red heifer. And this is, you know, basically what happens is the priests dealing with cleansing end up needing cleansed themselves. And so what you have is the idea that they too need to be able to cleanse themselves ritually so that they may continue their duties. And that's very, very important. So again, you've just got more procedure and regulation added because it's necessary. Now we get to chapter 20, we get the waters of Meribah. The Israelites, the whole congregation came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed in Kadesh. Miriam died there and was buried. So Miriam, a prophetess, she dies and she is buried. It is sad. There's no more mention of her than that. Aaron's going to die by the time we're done here today. He's going to get a lot of mention. Miriam gets very little, unfortunately. But it is mentioned she dies. The fact that she's even mentioned is good. She dies and she's buried there. It is interesting, and I don't know if there's anything to make of this or not, and it may be nothing, but you know, remember when the Israelites have been moving, it's always the cloud, right? The cloud lifts up and starts to move, and the Israelites follow it. Here, there's no mention of the cloud. Now, you could suggest that perhaps the Israelites are moving when they shouldn't be, or perhaps since they're wandering in the wilderness, and that is not God's intent, that it's the presence of the cloud is just not something that is necessary because they're wandering because of their continued rebellion. And God says that first generation, you're not going to the promised land. You're going to die out here in the wilderness. And so they're wandering. And so perhaps it's the wandering. The wandering doesn't need a cloud. By the way, if you try to map this out, they're wandering in circles, basically. They're not all that far from the promised land, but they're wandering in circles. So they get to this place, and there's no water. It's a very arid place, and the people complain, and it's the typical complaint we've already read about. If you brought us out here to die, why didn't you leave us in Egypt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so they complain there's no water. So they go to Moses and Aaron, go to God about it. And very important, notice that as they fall on their faces at the entrance of the tent to ask God for relief of some kind, the Lord speaks to Moses in 27. Take the staff and assemble the congregation, you and your brother Aaron, and command the rock before their eyes to yield its power. Thus you shall bring water out of the rock for them. Thus you shall provide drink for the congregation and their livestock. Notice God doesn't seem to have an angry response. He's not angry at the people. They're complaining, but they're complaining, but it's understandable. They're thirsty. You're not going to last long without water. I mean, kind of think of the toddler complaining that she's hungry. The parent might get a little impatient with the complaining, but the fact of the matter is she is hungry and she should eat. Okay, so God does not respond in anger. All right, he just says, you guys go to that rock there, and you command it and to yield water, and it will do so. All right, now having said that, let me read what goes from here out, starting with verse 9. I guess I could bring my Bible closer so I can see it. And it said, so Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he had commanded. Now that's the Aaron's staff, the one that flowered in the temple and produced almonds. This is what God told him to do. So Moses took the staff from before the Lord as he had commanded him. Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly before the rock, and he said to them, listen, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock? Then Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water came out abundantly, in the congregation and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me to show my holiness before the eyes of the Israelites, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them. These are the waters of Meribah, where the people of Israel quarreled with the Lord, and by which he showed his holiness. So what's going on here? So Moses and Aaron are barred now from the promised land because they disobeyed God. So what happened? Well, notice a couple of things. First, God has no response of frustration toward the people. It seems that they've got a legitimate complaint, although they could have worded it a little differently. But nevertheless, God doesn't seem to have any anger. And yet Moses, before he does what he does, he calls them rebels and notice what he says, shall we bring water for you out of this rock? Shall we bring water of you? And then he doesn't command the rock like God told him. He strikes it with the staff. So what's going on here? Well, we are in a situation where order in the ranks must be kept, right? Anybody in the military will tell you that. Order in the ranks must be kept. And we haven't had a lot of order in the ranks, although God keeps keeping it, right, in very drastic ways. And so Moses and Aaron's authority have been questioned. God's authority has been questioned. And so God has gone to great lengths to tell the people, I'm the one in charge. And the people who are mediating what it is that I want are Moses and Aaron. They're the folks. All right. Well, Moses and Aaron do what they're not supposed to do. They say, should we bring water from this rock for you? It's always God that does it. It's not them. They're instruments. So Moses, in a sense, takes credit for doing this. And then he not only speaks to the rock, he doesn't speak to the rock, he strikes it with Aaron's staff. Aaron's staff, remember his blooming staff, his staff with almonds on it, that staff, the very fact that that staff flowered in the temple, remember, was a sign from God that God had chosen them. It's God who does the choosing. Moses takes the staff, and the staff that should remind them that God is in charge, and he strikes it. He moves upon the rock and strikes it. And so basically, the Israelites who have been having trouble keeping order in the ranks, here we've got a situation where Moses and Aaron don't keep order in the ranks. They do not trust in God to show his holiness. It's God who is showing all of this and doing all of this. They take it for themselves, and this is an act. This is really what this is in military terms, is an act of insubordination. And so the penalty for that is both Aaron and Moses are not permitted to go into the promised land. It seems like a harsh penalty, but they're in a harsh situation. So that is basically what happens. And remember, all the glory goes to God. This reminds me, I think I've mentioned this in an earlier video, that Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, let your light so shine before others that they will see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. Moses and Aaron needed to do what God told them to do so that God himself would be glorified, that they would not be at the center of attention, but that is what they did. And so there is something to pay for that. So now we get a story about the people passing through Edom, the town of Edom. Now we have to go back and remember our history, Jacob and Esau. Jacob, the Israelites are the descendants of Jacob, and they approach the tribe, the nation, the people of Edom and their territory. And Edom are the people descended from Esau. So they're kindred. The Israelites and the Edomites are kindred. And so they want to pass through Edom. It makes sense to pass through Edom geographically in reference to the trip. They want to take what's called the King's Highway, which is a major trade route. But they want safe passage. They also, with their numbers, don't want to alarm the Edomites that they've got anything nefarious in mind. So they basically send diplomats to the Edomites to basically ask for passage through the land. We would like passage through the land, and we're kindred. We're kindred, we're connected together. And the Edomites say, no passage is allowed through the land. And they actually offer to pay for any water that they consume. But the Edomites send a message and say, you shall not pass through, or we will come out with the sword against you. So even volunteering to pay for what they consume, they're still not allowed to go in. And in fact, Edom really wants to make good on their threat, or at least has creates a show to show that they are going to make good on that threat, because they come out against them with a large force, heavily armed. And so Israel says, okay, this is not worth it. And so they turn away and travel by another route. Now, what's really interesting, when we get to Deuteronomy chapter 2, we're going to hear this story, but in that story, they will pass through the land of Edom. Now, what's going on here? Well, we probably got a couple of different traditions, a couple different stories, storytelling traditions. And it could be that the tradition in Deuteronomy 2 just doesn't know about this account of the Edomites refusing. And so story just makes the logical, the other tradition makes the logical assumption they would have traveled through Egypt, Edom, because that makes sense. So that's what it could be. It could be, an example would be the birth narratives. Both Matthew and Luke have birth narratives of Jesus, and it's Matthew tells us the story of the holy couple fleeing to Egypt and then coming back. Luke doesn't have that. After they're done with their time in Bethlehem, they go to live in Nazareth. It could just be that Luke doesn't know that story. It just, we all tell stories that we've heard, and we always leave out details because sometimes they're not important to the way we want to tell the story, but at other times we don't know the other details. Okay, so it could be just Luke doesn't know the details of that particular part of the birth story, so he just leaves it out. He makes the assumption they just go up to Nazareth. So that's what we could have here. The writer in Deuteronomy, the editor, doesn't know of this story of the refusal of the Edomites to let them pass through the land. That's possible. We don't know. No big deal, one way or another. But we do have it here in the story. And then at the end, of course, God tells them that Moses and Aaron will not enter the promised land. And Aaron is the first to go, and he is taken up to the mountain. Aaron will die on a mountain, and Moses will die on a mountain. That's an interesting thing. When we get to Moses, we'll talk about that. But basically, there is this ceremony of transfer where Aaron is divested, and that's where the word comes from. We talk about divesting and investing. This is terminology originally of the priest vesting themselves with their clothing or divesting themselves of their clothing. Aaron is divested of his priestly garb and given to his son Eleazar. And it's a ceremony to signify that he will be taking over. And Eleazar and Moses return from the mountain without Aaron. Aaron has died and been left on the mountain, we assume. And we're told that all the house of Israel mourns for 30 days, not just the traditional 7, but 30 days, because Aaron was a great and faithful follower of Jesus. I'm getting ahead of the game here with the New Testament. He's a faithful follower of the God of Israel, and certainly made a huge difference. And he, like people, like in our day, certain people pass from our midst. There's no way not to notice them, not to notice that absence. So they rightly mourn for him for 30 days. All right, well, that's where we are today. We'll pick up tomorrow, February 20th, and Numbers 21 and 22. Get this interesting story about the bronze serpent, and we got to deal with more journeying through other nations, and get into chapter 22. And we get this story that some of us remember from Sunday school of Balaam and the donkey and his talking donkey, and what's going on with that. So that's what we'll do tomorrow. All right, friends, let's pray. Gracious God, thank you for the gift of this day again. Thank you for the time that we have to enjoy the blessings of this life in this day, but also be about the business you have called us to be about. And so bless us in this day. Surround us with your grace and your presence in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Hasta mañana.